The Jared Dillian Show.
I'm Jared Dillian. This is the Jared Dillian Show. If you want to call to talk about your money, please call 844-305-7800. That's 844-305-7800. This is the Jared Dillian Show. And tomorrow is Election Day. And yeah, so we're going to talk a little politics, but not Democrats and Republicans. We're going to talk about the Libertarians because they are the stupid party this time around. They used to say the Republicans were the stupid party. It's no longer the case. Libertarians are the stupid party. First of all, I'm not the member of any political party. I am an independent. And by the way, being an independent is a lot less popular than it used to be. That was like the big thing in the 90s. Everybody was an independent. Ross Perot and all that stuff. Everybody says, I'm not a member of a party. I'm an independent. Well, that's kind of gone by the wayside. Now everybody identifies with one or two particular tribes. And the mainstream political parties have become more extreme, and people have gotten more extreme. We've talked about polarization before. So it's real. It's a real phenomenon, and there's fewer and fewer independents in between. Now, the funny thing about the 90s and people being independents is that back then, ideologically speaking, the two political parties were so close together that it didn't really make sense to be an independent. I mean, this is when Congress was relatively collaborative. You know, when you would have, many times representatives and senators would cross over on votes. Now it's strictly on party lines all the time. There are fewer independents these days, and political parties are much more extreme. Now, even though I am an independent, I am really a libertarian, though I am not a member of the Libertarian Party. The Libertarian Party is the stupid party, which we're going to talk about in a second. But I'm a big fan of free markets. Free minds and free markets. I'm a big fan of free markets. And markets have become progressively less free in the last 20 years. In my lifetime, the freest they got was probably the late 90s, 2000 Y2K era, and it's gone progressively downhill ever since. So markets are much less free than they used to be. The libertarians are losing. They are losing the argument, and they are speaking to a smaller and smaller group of people. Now, I've spent the last 6 months talking about taxes on the show. I talked about Biden's tax plan in great detail. The payroll taxes on incomes over $400,000, the increase in long-term capital gains rates, all that stuff. I've talked about Kamala Harris's tax plans. I'm not a fan of high taxes. In fact, I'm pretty self-interested, so when it comes down to it, if I were to vote for a candidate, I would vote with my wallet. But there are lots of other concerns. Anyway, the Libertarians. Now, back in 2016, the Libertarian Party had a fantastic ticket. If you recall, it was Gary Johnson was the presidential candidate, and he was the former Republican governor of New Mexico. Bill Weld was the vice presidential candidate, and he was the former Republican governor of Massachusetts. Two Republican governors in blue states that were very, very popular and very successful and very well known. Both Republican governors of blue states. Now, these guys are not what I would say strictly libertarian, but they were the classic definition of socially liberal and fiscal conservative, and that's really how they marketed themselves during the campaign. They said we are socially liberal and fiscally conservative, and they didn't get into all the black helicopter stuff about auditing the Fed and, eliminating income taxes and all that stuff. Gary Johnson was a big weed guy, big fan of legal marijuana. He was an expert on marijuana, and he pushed for legalization when he was governor, and he was way ahead of his time, way ahead of his time. Anyway, I was a big fan of these guys. I donated to the campaign. I actually got a T-shirt. I donated $250. I got a T-shirt. I still wear the T-shirt. I didn't vote because, in my opinion, money has more impact than voting. Now, I don't know if you remember this, but a few months before the election, these guys were polling huge. It was unprecedented. I mean, the Libertarian Party is typically like this marginalized, tiny phenomenon that gets like 0.5% of the vote. And a couple months before the election, they were getting double digits. They're getting double digits across the country. They had 14% in Colorado. And they were getting a lot of publicity. They had town halls on CNN. They had town halls on all the major networks. And then what happened was Bill Weld went on TV and he basically admitted that the reason he was running was so he could not elect Trump and to elect Hillary Clinton. And all the support for the Libertarian Party evaporated overnight. And even in spite of that, they finished with 3.5% of the vote, which was by far the biggest showing for the Libertarian Party ever. 3.5% of the vote. It was meaningful. And you could say that it had an impact on the general election. Now, a lot of people consider 2016 to be a failure because they were polling so big and it evaporated towards the end. I consider it to be a success. I mean, anytime you can get the Libertarian Party to get 3.5% of the popular vote, you have to consider that a success. It put the Libertarians on the map. Now, you would think that 2020 would be a massive opportunity for the Libertarians. I mean, just a massive opportunity because on the one hand, you have Joe Biden, who is the last bulwark against socialism. And Donald Trump, who is an authoritarian. So given the choice between socialism and authoritarianism, you would think that there would be a market for a third choice. Another alternative, big opportunity. So here's what happened. Now, Justin Amash was a Republican representative, and he was the guy that formed the Freedom Caucus in the House that was comprised mostly of libertarian-ish congressmen. And over time, the Freedom Caucus became not libertarian, but more and more conservative and more Trump-tastic. And they eventually kicked Justin Amash out of his own caucus. Justin Amash was picking fights with Trump, and he was losing the support of the voters in his district. He's from Michigan. And eventually he decided not to run for re-election. Now, for a period of time, he considered running as a libertarian, and he actually joined the Libertarian Party, and he's still in Congress, and he is a libertarian congressman. He joined the Libertarian Party. Now, he considered running for president as a libertarian. Now, he sort of tested the waters with the libertarians, and the libertarians were very cool to the idea because in 2016, 2012, and 2008, for the last three elections, they basically had Republicans that came in and joined the Libertarian Party and ran for president as a libertarian, and they were starting to feel kind of used, and they wanted somebody who was more ideologically pure. So Justin Amash was not going to run in a libertarian primary and lose because that's what would have happened. He actually would have lost. So in order to spare himself that embarrassment, he just decided not to run for president at all. And now he's probably going to be a political commentator or something like that. So the Libertarians chose a woman named Jo Jorgensen. And Jo Jorgensen is a professor at Clemson University, which I think says something about Clemson University, that they have a faculty member that is running for president as a libertarian, and the vice presidential candidate is a guy named Spike Cohen, whose biggest claim to fame is that he's a fourth-rate podcaster. They're basically nobodies. And they have proven to have a very childlike understanding as to how economics works. Jo Jorgensen tweets about things like civil asset forfeiture constantly, but knows nothing about economics or taxes or the Fed. It's the type of stuff that you would come up with in a college dorm. So my guess is that they'll get about 1% of the vote. But if Amash was the candidate, if he was, I mean, he's a professional politician. If Amash was the candidate, it's very likely that the Libertarians could be getting 10% of the vote and really have a meaningful impact on the election. If you want to talk about the magnitude of this missed opportunity for the Libertarians, it's mind-boggling. It's absolutely mind-boggling. So, and Jo Jorgensen is not even really well liked within the Libertarian Party. She's considered to be the woke candidate. She's considered to be left libertarian. So it's a mess. It's a mess. A lot of people don't like third parties. A lot of people don't like third parties because people blame them for electing the other side. The way I look at it, vote for the candidate who represents your own beliefs. If no candidates represent your beliefs, then don't vote. It's simple as that. If you are energized and excited about a candidate, then vote for that candidate. But if you're not energized or excited about a candidate, then just don't vote. You don't have to vote. There is nothing wrong with not voting. The lesser of two evils, voting, has given us nothing but misery over the history of our two-party system. And I'm not saying that other systems are better. I'm just saying you don't have to vote. The magnitude of the missed opportunity for the Libertarians is just astounding. And it also speaks to the need to have someone who is a skilled politician as your candidate. A lot of people don't like career politicians, but they have a better grasp of the issues than an ordinary person does. That's literally their job. I'm a smart guy and I have a lot of ideas, but it doesn't mean I should run for president. I have no experience in politics. By the way, if you're running for president, you can't wear burgundy shirts like Spike Cohen. How's it going for the Libertarians? Not so good, but it is also a function of ideas. There's never been a point in history where nobody cared about free minds and free markets. I'm Jared Dillian. This is The Jared Dillian Show.
The Jared Dillian Show.